Well, great having you here. I would like to start with you. About a month ago, you've published a LinkedIn post regarding the 28th regime and its adoption in the European Union. And you've pointed out that the changes need an unanimous decision in the member states. That happening is highly unlikely. So do you already have a solution in mind for that problem?
Unfortunately, I don't. The thing is that the Commission is already putting out these beautiful words about changing the EU and our regulatory tsunami. But I'm super worried that it will not happen in practice. When I was listening to you, and you actually scaled up in the United States, and this is still a fact that we are facing in Europe. Why so? Because our regulatory framework is not built for scale-ups, and there is no opportunity to take a risk in the EU. Everything is so regulated, and we don't have the risk financing here. That's something that we are still missing, because when we talk about the Capital Markets Union, we have been building for decades. When you ask the difficult questions, I asked this from the Prime Minister of Finland, Petteri Orpo, are you ready to harmonize taxation in the EU? No, you don't touch taxation. Are you ready to harmonize insolvency law? No, we don't harmonize the insolvency law. Are you ready to open the pension fund financing? Because that is required now for defense, for anything to scale up risk financing in the EU. No, we are not opening up our pension funds in Finland or in Netherlands. So what are you guys doing? You are not actually doing anything concrete for the Capital Markets Union, only these nitty-gritty things. So coming back to the 28th regime, I would love to see that functioning. I would love to see that happening. But how do you do that without touching bases on labor law? Without touching bases on taxation? And these are in the competencies of the member states. So you will have consults in Brussels helping companies to go through this jungle of national regulations or taxation or labor law or what? How do you actually do that? And I have been asking this again and again from the Commission, from the civil servants, from the politicians, and they cannot provide an answer. The answer is, those countries who want to do it, they can do it. Oh, great. So where will the single market be if you have like 7 countries doing whatever they want? This is not a 28th regime. So I would challenge the Commission to provide us an answer how we do that without unanimous decision making.
Any ideas there? Maybe you would like to answer directly, Ms. Verhoeven. Do you have any?
So the Commission
you would
is
like to add? You've touched upon. I think all the founders I'm talking to, they always really like to think that something needs to happen there. That's venture capital, and that there's still a lack of venture capital in Europe. I mean, you are a founder yourself, and I would like to know, is that a problem Dust has right now, or is there enough capital?
We've got another 25 minutes, and we can talk about the problems, but we can also talk about the things that are working quite well. And to look at the glass, I don't know how full, but somewhat full. So for context, we decided to start the company with my co-founder in France. It's incorporated in France. We were very lucky to have previous careers in tech, including in payments companies across the pond, very famous payments companies. I feel almost like I'm in a one-on-one here, and I'm going to get feedback on something later on. But what we learned there is to start with the things that you can do immediately. And what has changed so significantly in the last 10 years is that foreign capital is not afraid to invest in ambitious companies that are headquartered in Europe. Our lead investor happens to be American, but our employees are based in Paris. They are employed under French labor law. They spend, our remote policy is that they can work from wherever they want to work on Saturdays and Sundays, but the rest of the week they're in the office. And they're quite happy there. And I think that we'll definitely see the PowerPoint slides of the gap in financing for growth scale companies come later on. We haven't quite reached that yet. But I don't know that that's an excuse not to start in Europe today. I think we'd have to look for different excuses at this stage, because your first 10, 20, or I would argue $100 million will arrive if you have a credible option at building something substantial and can show that you're making meaningful strides towards it, attracting the right talent, attracting people who may have learned scale and operations in a fast-paced environment from a previous career, maybe in a US scale-up, but that have decided to come back to start a new phase of their life here in Europe. We have an amazing product that's very attractive. We have nice cities that people like to spend their holidays in and their years in. We have a place that most people agree is comfortable to have ideas, share them openly, and broadly speaking, do a number of dignified jobs that don't all have to be super high paying. Those are advantages that we can turn as a product. It's very readable to the market. And so as a 25-year-old, I'm no longer 25 years old, but if I was, I could look at that, and if it's readable and attractive, I could start my career in a French or an Estonian or a Finnish startup.
So, John, well, let's keep that optimism. John, I know and I heard that Paul was asking more or less the same question, but I was not so satisfied with your answer. He was asking if you would found well, another Stripe, another company in Europe next time. And I mean, just hearing Gabriel, it sounds that it would make sense. So could that be a thing for you in the future?
But I already have a company.
Yes, but you're a serial founder, so.
I really like the company I have. Don't take it away.
That's
please.
good to know.
But no, look again. We try to be clear-eyed on these things. Where, like I said, versus 15 years ago, it's night and day. And I very much agree with Gabriel's point that if a founder told me that in Europe that they couldn't raise money because the VC environment in Europe isn't good enough, I would probably just think to myself privately, oh, that idea, the founder's company isn't good enough. If they are succeeding, if they have a good company, they will be able to raise money for it. However, I think there's who was it? Coolidge had the quote of the business of the American people is business. I think there's a few things in the environment there when it comes to how freely people are able to move between companies, or the treatment of stock options, or the angel investing landscape, or things like that we should inspire to, and we should draw ideas from.
I would like to talk about the lack of collaboration between startups or scale-ups and the old economy. Old industries here in Europe. There right now are not enough big companies that really rely and like to rely on the services of startups. So are there any ways to change that? I would like to ask you this question.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this question. Coming from DG Grow, we deal typically with all kinds of industrial ecosystems. And indeed, we did an analysis of how digital these ecosystems are and how much of new technologies are being used in these ecosystems. And then you see that the results are a little bit disappointing, to say the least. And then if you go to big companies in Europe, indeed, if they want to go for innovative solutions, they very often go for the big names that they know out there. For instance, they need a tech solution. They go to one of the American big techs because they know the name. And they think, well, that's a reliable company, let's work with them. Without effectively creating opportunities for the start and the scale-ups that Europe has. Thank you for reminding that we have at least a very vibrant startup community. And that is a problem that we're very well aware of. What are we doing about it? Okay? We're trying to take a number of initiatives. First of all, levering on our networks. Yeah? We have developed cluster networks, Euroclusters, and we're actively working together with the clusters in regional settings in order to do events bringing the bigger players and the smaller players together. So that active matchmaking is already happening, and we want to engage a lot more there as well. We have also, for all of the industrial ecosystems, we have been creating platforms, transition pathway platforms, we call them, but these are basically spaces where the community comes together. And the transition pathway platforms we also use as a basis for dedicated initiatives where we bring basically the old sectors together with a new start and scale-ups. And that's also an area where we see still a lot more potential in the future. Another thing, all players. It's not only the private sector, it's also the public sector. Public procurement counts for about 15% of GDP. That's an enormous lever for pushing forward innovation. And here I'm happy that you, in your report, you underline the fact that actually public procurement has to be used as a lever. And for that to become true, it has to be easier for smaller companies, for startups to have access to public procurement. And that's a question of reforming the rules, but also actively fostering innovation procurements by giving guidelines for public buyers, by also dealing with very simple but very important things, such as who gets the IP in a procurement situation. The IP should remain with the provider of the service, should not go in the hand of the public buyer. So we're also looking at these. So all these are tools actually to create markets for startups and hopefully also scale-ups in Europe, if I can say.
We're definitely not lacking ideas. Ara, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I would disagree with that. The thing is that we don't need public procurement. What we need is a private investment. And we need companies who are hungry to grow in Europe. And this is something that we are lacking at today. And then what we have from the Commission, from the European Union, AI Act, Data Act, Data Governance Act, DSA, DMA, GDPR, you name it. In an AI Act, there are 300 pages, and not even the best lawyers can read it through. Not even the best lawyers. And they are making tons of money with that. And the Commission is trying to provide this code and practice now to try to serve the smaller and mid-cap companies to understand this law. But what has happened is that they have 1,000 people on Teams calls, and the Commission is telling them how to implement this law, and this code goes even beyond what is proposed in that law. This is the environment where companies should take risk and scale up. I'm sorry, it's impossible. Have you ever been in the private sector? And why these companies are turning to these big tech American companies? It is because they have data. They have data. European companies are lacking of data, and they will lack of data when we are implementing this amount of regulation. I'm not talking about private data. I'm talking about metadata, behavioral data, traffic data. It's required to actually feed AI and high tech. Everyone knows this who works in private sector tech companies. What we don't need is yet another public fund or public entity telling us how we should do things. We should enable these companies to take risk in Europe. Give them a chance. And also these guys, they have been scaling up in the United States. We need to hear companies who are here trying to scale up and grow and be in the global competition.
So, Gabriel, that's your job now. Are you up for it?
But I think there's a reasonable situation where a lot of R&D talent can operate in Europe, producing products that people like worldwide, that end up scaling from a go-to-market and sales perspective.
And why
faster.
they are not in the global category with American big tech and Chinese big tech?
Well, I'm not saying that we've succeeded yet. I'm just not sure that when we say, oh no, the government is buying Microsoft, I don't know that they're buying American or that they're just very slow at changing and that the first ones who came with personal software and Office 25 years ago were Microsoft. I think there's a latency to change that we have to accept. The pace at which companies are getting replaced by more nimble, more aggressive and more efficient players in this space. I worked for 4 years as an insurance player that is structurally 12 points below in OPEX costs versus leading players in France. And their incumbents are not going to catch up because they were built on old processes. So that process power is just going to compound over time. I think that replacement will happen via natural selection. At some point, the more competitive players win. I don't know that it'll be easy, but I don't know that for a company to grow in Europe and sell in the US is also completely demoralizing. It might be that it's an easier market to sell into. I don't know that people are very fussed about where the software was coded today. They just want to know that it works. And so rather than putting more large companies and small companies together, I'd encourage the buyers to potentially look at what is, very high performance software and becoming more demanding about the software that they buy. Educating the buyers about what great software looks like is definitely a way forward. It's true that the European Parliament telling us about sovereignty from Outlook emails on Dell laptops is always a tiny bit on the cheek. But I think that the best products have an amazing and unique opportunity to become more visibly competitive now. The technologies that Dust works with, but that I think people are getting increasingly familiar with, are showing new normal in a way that cannot be ignored. And the ones that want to bury their heads in the sand and say, we'll still buy the old normal, thank you very much, not the new normal, that seems to be too powerful and too effective, will be making, and maybe making their own graves in that respect.
David, you want to add something there? Yeah.
Not to come back to fintech, but I think there is something to be learned there. When it comes to incumbent versus insurgent, I mean, clearly the European Commission chose to open the market and to favor insurgent, but this didn't come at the expenses of incumbents. When you look what happened, basically, first, a lot of incumbents have used the service of a startup or have purchased startup or invested in startup. The quality of service of European banks has increased immensely. I mean, the bank I use, the level of service is on par with Stripe. I mean, or on par with big tech. So the level of service is important and it helps the consumers and it lowers the cost. But also the European, this innovation helped also the incumbents to deliver the service. So I think this is a crucial point and it happened through market mechanism.
John, you would like to add that? Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that, I think, when you said the incumbents have welcomed, this regulation. Yeah, exactly. Well, you got to, yeah. So something like PSD2 had an explicitly pro-competition mandate and some quite clever mechanisms by which it was mandated that data be opened up in a privacy-preserving way and kind of forcing competition and interoperability so that if you wanted to get a loan, you didn't have to necessarily go to your existing bank from it, but you could export your data and you could shop around a little bit. And I think it's important to draw the distinction. Actually, I'd be curious for your thoughts on the AI Act, but I think it's important to draw the distinction between identifying market failures and explicitly creating pro-competition mechanisms by, again, getting more competition within the entire EU bloc or by opening up kind of new forms of competition or something like that. That is good, versus one of the things I was very glad to see the Draghi report call out was we somehow seem to really like a priori prevention of harms that are hypothetical and not yet being widely seen. And we have to get away from that. Again, in the case of PSD2, we saw something that was happening already that we didn't like, and we said, okay, let's nudge it a bit over here, post hoc. And that is very different. Well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that very different to the AI Act?
No, I completely agree. I think there's regulation that creates standards and that drives interoperability, which directly and indirectly makes the market clear for builders and buyers. And I think when the market is clear for builders, they can operate and grow. And when it's clear for buyers, they don't need to hire lawyers to tell them if they're okay to be holding the gun when the smoke comes out of it and they're told that they had the data of a customer that was actually just a candidate that they'd forgotten about 5 years ago and that it's come back to bite them. That the guardrail regulation is maybe a little zealous and I think in some cases confusing both builders and buyers. So I would go back to what the goal of this should be and which outcomes we should be judged on. I was at the European Parliament this morning and very curious to see, are there any dashboards by which we will judge the AI Act when, and is there a feedback mechanism that allows us to put it back on the table if it doesn't deliver what we thought it would deliver? Nobody should blame people for taking a stab at it, but if it doesn't work out, we shouldn't just say, well, now it's the AI Act, let's move on, let's do the code of practice, because we have another layer of details to go through. That I think is counterproductive and something that we may have to deal with structurally more often than in the US.
And maybe another way to put it is, I was very intrigued to see the discussion of GDPR being put on the red tape bonfire. I didn't know we had a red tape bonfire, but very evocative choice of words, and interesting to see that happening. But not that much has changed since the introduction, and so if we introduced GDPR only a few years ago, and then now we are saying it must go on the bonfire of red tape, I hope we take away a general lesson from that in addition to the specific lesson about GDPR.
Especially since I think there's a parallel to be drawn between GDPR and electric vehicle regulation in Europe over the last 15 years. The GDPR has made it very convenient for the entire internet to click twice before entering a website. Not to read anything else, but to click twice. And for Meta to benefit from the data that's being gathered, because of course larger companies, much more sophisticated companies, know what they should put behind those clicks in order to take maximum advantage of it. In the same way, I think it's quite clear that Europe has quite aggressively regulated its way into making China very powerful on EV, and is now faced with a 2035 deadline that we don't quite know what to do with, because it wouldn't be easy for the German automotive industry to cope. Those are timelines and guardrails and situations where we have an opportunity to act faster on the AI Act and in this wave of technology. Again, I would just start with saying, before changing anything, can we agree on the dashboards or the vocabulary that we'll use to talk about performance, and whether or not we think that the goal is to protect or to challenge the incumbents? We have very powerful incumbent companies in Europe that we actually like to defend. Some of them in defense, for example, and that's okay. We should be clear and explicit about those goals and allow the builders of tomorrow to know which pockets they are free to roam and play in versus which ones they shouldn't hope too much from.
Definitely write more about defense than I used to. So I would like to ask a more general question now. We are facing a global trade war at the moment, and so that brings a new urgency to come into action. And nowadays there seems to be like the more willingness to engage, to bring Europe forward. What, from your points of view, is most important right now? Maybe you can start answering this question.
Right now, well, listening a little bit to the debate, which is a lot about regulation. What is good regulation? What is bad regulation? What brings us forward? What makes us go backward, including the 28 regime, on which I will not comment, because Niels will be doing that, I think, after the break. So I leave him the honor. I would want to mention something that I think is very important in this discussion, and that is a single market. You mentioned it already. The single market, what is it? It is about replacing national rules and regulations and nitty-gritty by a pan-European standard. Now, the single market, and I know it because in one way or another I've been working on it for the last 20 years, is all but sexy. Yeah? It's about nitty-gritty. It's about the details. But it's in the details that it hurts. And the problem in the single market, if I may say so, is not the quality of EU regulation. We can have a debate on quality of EU law, and we must have a debate, and as you know, the Commission is taking bold action to simplify. But the problem of the single market is the fact that member states actually are not living up to what they should be doing. Yeah? They don't take the necessary steps to remove the barriers. And in that sense, as you probably know, we're working quite hard on our single market strategy, which should be coming forward, which will focus right and center on how to make sure that we remove those terrible remaining barriers that hurt our companies. Looking into tools to do that. I can tell you, we'll try to be creative, we'll come forward with all kinds of proposals, but there will be one thing absolutely needed to make it work. And that is the political courage at each and every level of government within the European Union. And actually, in that respect, I also count on the European Parliament to act as multipliers and also tell the member states to play ball. Thanks.
Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. I think that we should give up unanimous decision-making in many ways, because that is the barrier we are facing now when we need the unanimous decision-making on these big things, like trying to make the capital markets union happen right now, right? We need own resources for the EU also, but we need to also use the EU money the smart way. I'm not a fan of subsidies. What I would like to see is more like the loan guarantees that we have with the InvestEU program, for example. But I always say these 4 things, and it's talent, you mentioned it also. We need to have more talent also moving around in the EU. 4% of Europeans live and work in another country than where they are from. So we need to get people move somewhere else, to Paris also. Helsinki is also nice. And then we also need to attend talent from outside the EU. That goes without saying. Then we need that risk capital, and we need to get that moving around in the EU. Then we need to move these regulatory barriers. I think that we need to review the GDPR, because I don't want to click, 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 and I know that Meta is doing, trust me, I know, unfortunately. So yeah, we need to review the GDPR. But that being said, AI Act is not even enforced yet. It will be enforced in August. And our companies are going bananas there, trying to understand what it means for them. So these regulatory barriers, definitely. And then the single market. We need the home market for our companies to grow. I hate when people are saying that, oh, we need to catch the big tech from the States. You will not catch the big tech in the EU. Sorry, Anu Bradford, but regulation cannot be the best export product from the EU. And you cannot catch the big tech here because it's not their home market. They have a huge home market that enables risk and enables them to grow. So let's focus on our own companies here. Instead of all the time trying to catch them, let them grow here and not go to Silicon Valley to grow.
So John, what could make the European market more important for Stripe?
One thing I'll just note is I think the pandemic really changed the norms around how startups build teams and where those teams are located, where it's very often that I run into startups or scale-ups that are hiring all across Europe. And it's interesting because, you know, we talk about the free movement of people within Europe, but it's only free movement if you actually cross a border, you have to move. And so if we hire a Hungarian or a Spaniard or an Italian in Stripe to work in our Dublin office, that's easy. If we hire them in Spain or in Italy or in Romania, whew, now, okay, that's really complicated. And, you know, it's complicated for us. We can deal with it. We're a large company. If you're a 10-person startup or a 20-person startup, you would like to have access to the entire European talent market. And in the old world, where you would make everyone move to the office in Dublin, that was much easier. But now in the new world, it's actually ironically become much harder in the remote work world. And so, again, I think the 28th regime work, specifically addressing talent with all the kind of challenges you highlight around you're dealing with member states and labor laws. But I think it's interesting to note that the norms have really changed since before the pandemic in a way that I think highlight the importance of some of this labor law stuff.
The hurdles John was mentioning, are these also hurdles that bother you as the CEO of Dust?
Yeah, I think one concrete one on the fluidity of talent is that a notice period can be obnoxiously long for somebody who's 3 years into their career in marketing and obviously needs to stay 90 days after they've decided to change companies because they're so critical to the employer. If I can make one suggestion, I think there's a game to be played, and there are a lot of people who are willing to engage in playing it. But the reciprocity that can come from saying, hey, you want European subsidies? Great, you sign a pledge that says that no notice periods are above 2 weeks, and then you get to play ball. You're part of this club. I'm a huge fan of the statistician, late statistician Hans Rosling, and I think he drew amazing very visual explanations of how there are more similarities between fast-moving, forward-looking companies, whichever country of Europe they're from, than there are between the incumbents and the slow-moving and the fast-moving of any given country in Europe. So why don't we start with the people who all agree, whether they're based in Austria, Germany, Helsinki, or Paris. Start with a small minimum viable policy or minimum viable product, a small set of clear rules where those people opting in can play by those standards, and see if that group gets bigger or smaller over time. I suspect it'll get bigger, and then when those ideas catch on, people tend to want to steal them.
David, do you think that the group would grow, or would it not? The group Gabriel was talking about.
Well, I think if there is one thing we learn from this is that we should manage to bridge the gap between the culture of startup and the culture of government, and I think that's what we are doing here. So if there is one thing that works here is removing a bit of excuses and having government understand the culture of startup in terms of delivery, in terms of focus on outcome, focus on key performance indicators, and removing a bit of the excuses. We all know, we can all defend ourselves and say, we did it, this we did. What matters is the delivery. We have Mike Bracken here in the room. He knows better than anyone. The results, showing the result and what clear vision on what we want to do and the details that we need to deliver it.
I would like to end this discussion on an optimistic note. So therefore it would be great if all of you could just answer a question very shortly, maybe with only one word or one sentence. So what makes you optimistic about the future of Europe? Maybe you could start, David.
5 years ago, I spoke with someone in the European Innovation Council and criticizing European funding, and I said, there are two circles, the innovators and those who are funded by Europe, and they have no overlap. And today, last week, I spoke with him, and in the European Innovation Council, the overlap is almost 100% when it comes to trust and investor. There is progress that can happen, an institution can progress and it can advance.
It's true, it's true. 10 years ago when you started a company in Europe, there was those who were going to get subsidies and those who were trying to build a business. And they were the very different lines. I think what makes me optimistic is Europeans. I think I share, over the last 15 years that I've been in tech, and I've worked with a lot of Europeans, including in American companies, there's this thing that we can't quite name, but that makes us feel quite happy and actually quite proud of being European. And those forces are getting closer and closer together. And across countries, across cultures, they share increasingly a core belief that we can move things around, and maybe we've seen some early signs of that. And I think we've got the European leader that we wanted in Mr. Trump now. So helping Europe maybe get its act together a little more aggressively, and saying that many of the barriers were mental. And so doing things faster is probably possible.
Gabriel stole mine, so I'll have to do a different one. I'd say clarity. I think we're having a crisp, aligned, specific discussion in a way that I've never seen here.
As a Finn, I will answer with one word, slush. If you haven't been in this...
no advertising on the panel.
Because I think it tells it all, it tells about the weather in November in Helsinki, and it also tells about this great event where investors can meet startups, and so come to Helsinki next November, you will know what slush is.
Totally agree.
Okay, and my word would be mindset. Mindset, because I see, I'm a mother of 4 grown-ups, and I see, and I read it also in the State of European Tech report, that there is much more of an entrepreneurial spirit today and a willingness to take risk at all levels, even I would say at the levels of government. So mindset, I think, is what will keep us going here. And in that respect, I would also want to refer to the recent results of the European barometer, of the Eurobarometer, which I always find interesting to see, which show an overwhelming support and belief that Europe will pull us through in the times of crisis. So with that mindset, with that belief, with that talent, I think we should be able to get by. Thanks.
Thank you.